The little town of Denton, Texas, was the kind of place where people still believed in fairy tale weddings. Neighbors decorated porches with string lights during the holidays. Folks waved to each other at the gas station, and gossip spread faster than wildfire. Everyone knew everyone's business, and when Jason Miller announced he was marrying Samantha Hayes, people leaned in close. It was the storybook match the town had been waiting for. Jason was 33, a strong, broad-shouldered man who worked construction and could frame a house in half the time it took anyone else. He was the kind of guy who carried himself with confidence, yet people who knew him well whispered about his quick temper. "Jason doesn't like to be embarrassed," an old friend once said. "You cross him, and he'll never let it go." Samantha, on the other hand, was 27, delicate and warm-hearted. She arranged flowers at the local shop on Main Street, her hands always smelling faintly of roses and lavender. People called her the Sunshine Girl. Customers came in just to see her smile. She had a softness that made strangers feel like friends, and she dreamed of one day owning her own flower shop. When Jason walked into that shop one spring afternoon, covered in sawdust and sweat from a job site, Samantha swore she saw something in his eyes, a man who needed grounding, someone who craved the stability she offered. To Jason, Samantha was purity, a woman who could wash away the stains of his past failed relationships. Within months, they were inseparable. The town buzzed when Jason proposed under the oak tree in her parents' yard. Samantha cried, nodding yes, as neighbors peeked through their curtains. They planned a wedding that was equal parts small-town charm and Texas boldness. The ceremony took place outdoors on a golden September evening. The smell of barbecue drifted across the field, children chased each other between hay bales, and country music played softly in the background. Samantha wore a simple lace gown. Her hair was swept back, and she carried a bouquet of white lilies tied with ribbon. Jason stood tall in his gray suit and cowboy boots, his hand gripping hers tightly. When the preacher said, "Till death do you part," the crowd chuckled warmly, never imagining those words would turn prophetic. At the reception, Jason raised his glass high. "To my wife," he boomed, his voice thick with pride. "The only woman I'll ever love." Samantha blushed, lowering her gaze, her friends laughing and clapping. They danced under string lights, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. People later said the couple looked as if they had been made for each other. But even then, there were cracks no one could see. Jason asked strange questions when the music died down. "You ever think about your exes?" he muttered into Samantha's ear, half drunk, when they stepped off the dance floor. She shook her head, brushing it off as nerves, but his grip on her hand was tighter than before. Still, Samantha believed in fresh starts. She believed marriage was a promise, a shelter against the storms of life. On their wedding night, she whispered to him, "We'll build something real, Jason. Just you and me." He kissed her, but behind his eyes flickered something restless, something no one, not even his new bride, could name. A few days later, they moved into their new home, a modest white siding house on the edge of town. The grass wasn't cut, the paint was peeling, but Samantha walked through the door with shining eyes. "This is where our story begins," she said, her voice catching with hope. The first mornings were sweet. She cooked eggs and bacon in the little kitchen, humming along with the radio. Jason sat at the table with his coffee, watching her move, thinking maybe this was all he had ever wanted. They talked about the future, her dream flower shop, maybe a couple of kids, a dog in the yard. For a moment, Jason believed in it too. But something darker brewed beneath that surface. In Jason's chest, doubt gnawed at him. He had always battled suspicion, always imagined betrayal before it even existed. His friends said he carried jealousy like a second skin. Now, even with Samantha's laughter echoing in the halls of their new house, that jealousy started whispering. And then came the night that would shatter everything. Jason woke restless, sweat beading on his forehead. A sharp sting burned between his thighs. He stumbled to the bathroom, flicked on the harsh light, and looked down. What he saw made his stomach turn. Small, writhing, white creatures moved where no man should ever see them. For a long moment, he froze, his reflection staring back at him in the cracked mirror. Then the horror slammed into him like a freight train. His hands shook violently, his breath quickened, and his mind leapt to the only conclusion his pride and fear allowed. Samantha did this to me. In that instant, the vows, the dancing, the whispered promises, all of it evaporated. Rage and disgust swallowed him whole. What began as a Texas love story was about to spiral into something far darker. Jason's hands trembled as he gripped the sink. The bathroom mirror reflected a face he barely recognized, sweat-soaked, pale, eyes wild with panic. His chest rose and fell in short, jagged bursts. He pulled his gaze downward again, unable to believe what he had just seen. The sight alone was enough to twist his stomach into knots, writhing white specks where no man should ever see them. His mind spun. What the hell is happening to me? He staggered back, hitting the tiled wall with a thud. His breaths came louder now, echoing in the tiny bathroom. Every rational thought vanished, replaced by fear and disgust. And in that fear, his mind reached for the nearest explanation, Samantha. By the time he stormed out of the bathroom, the house that once felt like a safe haven seemed suffocating. The honeymoon glow, the laughter in the kitchen, the silly dances in the living room, evaporated in a single night. All Jason could think was, she's done this to me. She's betrayed me. Samantha, still half asleep, rubbed her eyes as she sat up in bed. Her voice was soft, confused. Jason? What's wrong? What happened? Her concern only fueled his rage. He pointed at her with a trembling hand, his voice shaking. Don't you dare act innocent. You infected me. You brought this filth into our home. She blinked, stunned, clutching the blanket to her chest. Jason, I don't understand. What are you talking about? He was pacing now, like a caged animal, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Don't lie to me, Samantha. I saw them. Maggots. Do you hear me? Maggots. On me. Her face drained of color, but not from guilt, only shock. That's impossible, she whispered. Tears welled in her eyes. Jason, you need to go to the hospital. Please. Something's wrong, but it's not me. I swear to you, it's not me. He spun toward her, his jaw clenched, eyes filled with venom. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know what this means? You've been with someone else. You've humiliated me. Samantha's voice cracked as she tried to reach him. Jason, listen to me. I have never been unfaithful to you. I love you. Why would I do something to hurt you? But her words bounced off the wall of paranoia building inside his head. Jason's pride, his fear of betrayal, mixed with the grotesque image he couldn't erase, and together they swallowed him whole. The house fell silent except for the tick of the clock on the wall. Midnight stretched into something darker. Samantha rose from the bed, careful, her hands raised as if trying to calm a wild beast. She stepped toward him. Please, Jason. You need help. Let's go right now. We can fix this, together. Her plea should have softened him. But instead, Jason's mind twisted it into mockery. Together? To him, the words sounded like a cruel joke. He barked a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You ruined me, Samantha. You took vows and you spit on them. No, she begged, her voice trembling. I meant every word of those vows. You are my husband. You are my life. Jason's fists clenched. He felt cornered, even though Samantha was the one standing in fear. To him, her tears looked like lies. Her trembling voice sounded like deception. The more she tried to convince him, the more convinced he became that she was guilty. He moved closer, his shadow falling over her. Samantha took another step back, her body pressing against the dresser where her wedding dress still hung in its plastic cover. It was supposed to be a symbol of new beginnings. Now, it loomed like a ghost of promises already broken. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Jason, don't do this. Please. I'm begging you. For a second, just a second, his expression flickered, like a man fighting with himself. But then he gritted his teeth, pushing that hesitation away. To Jason, there was no turning back. The honeymoon had lasted only days, but in his mind, the marriage was already poisoned beyond repair. And Samantha, the woman who had dreamed of a family, a flower shop, and a life filled with love, stood helpless as her husband's fear and fury turned her safe new home into a prison. The air inside the Miller house felt heavy, like the walls themselves were closing in. Jason's boots scraped against the hardwood floor as he paced back and forth, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his temples. His mind replayed the sight over and over, fueling the fire that already raged inside him. Samantha stood near the dresser, the thin straps of her nightgown trembling on her shoulders as she shook. Her wide brown eyes followed Jason's every movement, desperate to find a crack in his fury, a place where her words could break through. Jason, she whispered, her voice raw with fear. You have to calm down. Please. You're scaring me. Her plea only made him snap harder. He slammed his fist into the wall, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. The plaster cracked beneath his knuckles. You think I'm the one who should calm down? You're the liar here. You poisoned me, Samantha. You brought this filth into our marriage. She shook her head violently, tears spilling down her cheeks. That's not true. I haven't done anything. You have to believe me. Jason stepped closer, his shadow looming over her. His voice dropped to a dangerous growl. Then explain it to me. Explain why I found maggots crawling on me. Go on. Tell me how that happens to a faithful man with a faithful wife. Her lips quivered, but she couldn't answer. What answer could she give? She didn't know what had happened to him. She only knew she wasn't the cause. I don't know, she sobbed. But it's not me. You need a doctor. We can go right now. I'll drive you myself. Jason's laugh was sharp and cruel, slicing through the tension like a blade. A doctor? So they can confirm what I already know? That my wife's been sneaking around behind my back. Her knees wobbled, and she clutched the dresser for support. Jason, I swear to you, I've never touched another man since the day I met you. I love you. Please, don't let whatever you saw tonight destroy us. He leaned in close, his breath hot and bitter, his eyes narrowed with accusation. Destroy us? Samantha, it's already destroyed. You killed it. You killed us. Her hands trembled as she reached for him, resting gently on his forearm. You're not thinking straight. I know you're afraid, but I'm your wife. I'm on your side. For a fleeting second, her touch softened him. His muscles slackened, and his jaw unclenched. It was as if the real Jason, the one who had danced with her under the wedding lights, was clawing to the surface. But then, as quickly as it came, it vanished. He shoved her hand away, sending her stumbling backward. Don't touch me, he barked. You disgust me. The words cut deeper than any blade. Samantha's sob turned into a wail as she slid down against the dresser, her head shaking in disbelief. Jason, please, don't do this. I don't know what you think I've done, but you're wrong. I would never hurt you. Jason towered over her, his fists clenching at his sides. His thoughts spiraled further, feeding on themselves, each one darker than the last. To him, her tears looked staged, her pleas rehearsed. He saw betrayal in every word, every glance, even though there was none. The clock ticked loudly in the silence between them. Midnight was long gone, and outside, the Texas night was still and quiet. Crickets chirped faintly, unaware of the storm raging inside the Miller home. Samantha crawled to her knees, her voice breaking as she tried one last time. We just got married, Jason. We're supposed to be planning our future, not fighting like this. Don't let one night, one moment of fear, erase everything we've built. Jason's lip curled, his voice laced with venom. Future? What future? You've already ruined it. Do you know what it's like for a man to feel unclean in his own skin? To feel violated? She pressed her palms together, begging. I don't know why this happened to you, but it's not because of me. You have to trust me. You promised me forever. Please, keep that promise. He shook his head slowly, his eyes burning with rage. Forever ended the moment I saw what you did to me. The tension snapped like a whip. Jason lunged forward, his hands grabbing her shoulders as he shook her violently. Samantha gasped, her voice strangled by terror. Stop. Jason, stop. You're hurting me. But Jason didn't stop. His mind was too far gone, poisoned not by his wife, but by his own paranoia and pride. The man Samantha had married, the man who had vowed to protect her, was gone, replaced by someone she no longer recognized. Her screams echoed through the house, muffled by the walls that had just begun to witness their life together. Jason's fury grew with every second, drowning out the faint sound of her sobs. His voice thundered, shaking the room. You lied to me. You made a fool of me. Samantha's final words were barely more than a whisper, desperate, broken. I love you, Jason. Even now. I love you. But love couldn't reach him anymore. The sound of Samantha's sobs seemed to vibrate through the walls, filling the house with a grief too large for its small rooms to contain. Jason's grip on her shoulders was iron, his knuckles white, his chest heaving like a bull ready to charge. She tried again, her voice breaking in the quiet of the night. Jason, please, look at me. You know me. You know who I am. I would never betray you. For a heartbeat, Her words seemed to hang in the air, fragile as glass. But Jason's mind, clouded with paranoia and rage, shattered it instantly. "You're a liar," he barked, spittle flying from his lips. His eyes were wild, burning with a twisted mix of disgust and fury. "You brought shame into my house. You made me a fool on our wedding week." Samantha's legs buckled beneath her. She sank to the floor, pressing her hands against his chest, not to push him away but to steady herself. "I swear to God, Jason, I've been faithful. If you don't believe me, take me to a doctor. Test me. Do whatever it takes. But please, don't let anger do something we can't take back." Her desperation trembled in every word, but Jason was deaf to reason. He shoved her backward, and she hit the side of the dresser with a dull thud. The sound made her gasp, her breath caught in her throat. The room was dim except for the glow of the bedside lamp, casting harsh shadows that made Jason look more monster than man. His hands shook, but it wasn't fear. It was the adrenaline of a man convinced he'd been wronged. "You think you can stand there and cry your way out of this," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "I saw the truth with my own eyes. You disgust me, Samantha. You ruined everything." Her tears flowed freely, streaking her cheeks. She raised her hands like a child pleading with a parent. "Jason, I love you. I married you because I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you. Please, don't do this. Don't throw it all away." Jason's breathing grew louder, faster. He was pacing again, running his fingers through his hair, muttering to himself like a man possessed. "She ruined me. She destroyed me. Can't let it stand, can't let it stand." Samantha tried to crawl toward him, her hands trembling against the floor. Her voice was soft, barely audible. "We can still fix this. Whatever it is, we can fix it." That whisper was the last tether to his humanity, but Jason ripped it away. He spun around, towering over her, his shadow swallowing her small figure on the carpet. His jaw clenched, his fists curled tight. "No fixing this," he hissed. "It's over." With sudden, terrifying force, Jason lunged. His hands wrapped around her neck, squeezing tight. Samantha's eyes flew open in shock, her hands clawing at his wrists as she struggled for air. Her legs kicked wildly against the floor, the sound of her heels striking wood echoing like a desperate drumbeat. Her voice rasped, broken, as she tried to speak through the crushing pressure. "Jazz, please." But Jason's face was stone, his eyes locked on hers with a hatred that had swallowed every ounce of the love they once shared. His teeth ground together as he pressed harder, the veins in his arms bulging. Samantha's vision blurred. The room spun, the edges of her world darkening. In her final moments, her gaze darted to the plastic garment bag still hanging from the closet door. The wedding dress she had worn only days before. Its white lace shimmered faintly in the lamplight, a cruel reminder of vows shattered too soon. Her lips formed the words without sound. "I love you." Then her body went limp. Jason froze, his chest rising and falling violently as he looked down at her still figure. His hands loosened and fell away, trembling now not from anger but from the sudden, suffocating weight of what he had done. The room was silent. Too silent. He staggered backward, staring at her lifeless body sprawled on the bedroom floor, her hair fanned out, her eyes still half open as though she couldn't believe it either. The silence pressed against his ears until all he could hear was the pounding of his own heart. Jason's breath came in shallow bursts. He pressed his palms against his temples, shaking his head over and over. "No, no, no, no," his voice cracked hollow. "What have I done?" The house that had once been filled with dreams of a future, children, laughter, Sunday dinners, was now nothing more than a crime scene. The faint scent of Samantha's perfume still lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of the woman he had loved and destroyed in the same breath. Jason stumbled toward the bed, collapsing onto the edge, his face buried in his hands. Guilt and rage battled inside him, twisting his insides until he thought he might explode. He looked back at her body, but instead of remorse, another thought crawled into his mind like poison. She deserved it. She made me this way. It was easier to believe that than to face the truth. Outside, the world remained oblivious. A dog barked in the distance, a truck rumbled down the road, and the Texas night rolled on as though nothing had happened. But inside the Miller home, Samantha's life had been extinguished in a storm of suspicion and fury. Jason sat there in the dark, rocking back and forth, torn between horror and self-justification as the minutes ticked away. He had crossed the line, and there was no going back. By morning, the neighbors would wonder why Samantha hadn't opened her shop. By afternoon, the police would come knocking. And when they did, Jason's nightmare would only begin. Morning sunlight crept across Denton, Texas, spilling over porches and fields like any other day. But inside the Miller house, the silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the uneven breaths of Jason Miller as he sat slumped at the kitchen table. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair wild, and his eyes bloodshot from a night spent in torment. On the floor upstairs lay Samantha, her body cold, her wedding dress still hanging untouched in the corner like a cruel witness. By mid-morning, her absence was noticed. Samantha's boss at the flower shop grew concerned when she didn't show up for her shift. Samantha was never late, never careless. Calls went unanswered. Texts delivered but stayed unread. Finally, a neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, spotted the unanswered car in the driveway and felt something wasn't right. She walked up the porch steps, knocked on the door. No answer. The blinds were still drawn tight. She pressed her ear to the door and thought she heard faint movement. Instinct told her to call the police. When the first patrol car pulled up, lights flashing softly in the daylight, Jason opened the door. He looked disheveled, his hands trembling at his sides. The officer's eyes narrowed immediately. Something was wrong. "Sir, we got a call about a welfare check," Officer Daniels said firmly. "Mind if we come in?" Jason hesitated, his throat dry. She's not here," he muttered. But the officer had already caught the sour smell of sweat and something heavier lingering in the air. "Step aside," Daniels ordered. Jason backed away slowly, his body slumping against the wall. The officers moved through the house, their boots heavy against the wood floors. It didn't take long. One officer pushed open the bedroom door and froze. The scene before him was unmistakable. Samantha lay lifeless on the carpet, her nightgown rumpled, her skin pale. The wedding dress swayed gently in its garment bag, as though mocking the tragedy. "Dispatch, we need homicide," the officer radioed, his voice clipped. Jason buried his face in his hands, rocking back and forth in the hallway. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he whispered. Within the hour, the small street filled with squad cars, detectives, and forensic vans. Yellow tape stretched across the front yard, drawing a crowd of stunned neighbors. People whispered to one another, unable to believe that the couple who had danced under string lights just days ago had become the center of a murder scene. Detective Maria Lopez, a seasoned investigator with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, took charge. She stepped into the house, scanning everything. The disarray in the bedroom, the bruises around Samantha's neck, the shattered look on Jason's face. "Jason Miller," she said firmly, crouching down to his level. "I need you to tell me what happened here." Jason lifted his head, tears streaking his face. "She lied to me," he stammered. "She betrayed me. I found maggots. She infected me." His words came out broken, desperate, like a man clinging to a story he needed to believe. Detective Lopez kept her expression calm, though she'd heard every kind of excuse before. "Maggots?" she repeated, her tone skeptical. "And you're saying your wife caused that?" "Yes," Jason insisted, his voice rising. "She brought something into this marriage. She ruined me." Lopez studied him for a long moment. In her line of work, she'd seen men invent wild justifications to cover up acts of violence. To her, Jason looked less like a victim and more like a man unraveling in front of her eyes. As officers led Jason away in handcuffs, neighbors gasped. Mrs. Henderson clutched her chest, tears brimming in her eyes. "Poor Samantha," she whispered. "She didn't deserve this." At the precinct, Jason sat in the interrogation room, his wrists chained to the table. Detective Lopez entered with a file in hand and set it down with a quiet thud. "Jason," she began, her voice steady. "We'll run tests. We'll find out if what you're saying is true. But right now, all I see is a man who killed his wife." Jason's eyes darted back and forth, his breath shallow. "You don't understand," he said, almost pleading. "I saw them. I felt them. They were real." Lopez leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "What I understand is that your wife is dead, and you were the only one in that house. You want me to believe she destroyed you? Prove it." Jason swallowed hard, his confidence faltering. For the first time, the cracks in his story began to show. Meanwhile, forensic investigators combed through the house. They photographed the scene, collected fibers, and documented every detail. But what stood out most were the bruises around Samantha's neck, clear, undeniable evidence of strangulation. There was no sign of forced entry, no struggle with an outsider. This wasn't a break-in. This was intimate, personal, and it was clear who had done it. By late afternoon, the medical examiner confirmed Samantha's cause of death, manual strangulation. The examiner also examined Jason, and the truth began to unravel. His condition wasn't caused by infidelity or betrayal. It was something far less dramatic and far more damning for him. But that revelation was still to come. For now, the town only knew that Samantha Hayes, the bright young woman with a smile that lit up her flower shop, was gone. And her husband, the man she trusted with her life, was sitting in a jail cell, muttering to himself about maggots. The fairy tale had rotted from the inside, and now the entire community was left to ask, how could love curdle into murder so quickly? The small interrogation room smelled faintly of coffee and sweat. Jason sat slouched in the metal chair, his wrists still cuffed to the table. He stared at the floor, mumbling fragments of the same story he had repeated all morning. Maggots. She brought them to me. She destroyed me. Detective Maria Lopez pushed open the door and entered with a folder tucked under her arm. Her expression was calm but firm, the look of a woman who had heard every kind of excuse in her career. She set the folder on the table and slid into the chair across from him. Jason, she began, her voice steady, almost gentle. The medical examiner just finished the initial reports. We need to talk about what they found. Jason lifted his head slowly, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with exhaustion. They'll see I'm right, he muttered. They'll see she infected me. Lopez leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. What they found was no infection, no sexually transmitted disease, no evidence that your wife ever passed anything to you. What you saw, it wasn't what you think it was. Jason blinked, confusion flickering across his face. No, I saw it. I saw them moving. Lopez opened the folder and pulled out a few papers, tapping them for emphasis. The doctors found evidence of poor hygiene, Jason. A wound, likely from scratching, that became contaminated. Flies laid eggs. That's where the maggots came from. Not your wife. Not infidelity. Not betrayal. Just your own neglect. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jason's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He shook his head, almost violently, as though denying reality could make it disappear. No, you're lying. She lied to me. She had to. Lopez's tone hardened. She didn't lie. She didn't betray you. And now she's dead, Jason. Dead because you couldn't control your paranoia. He slammed his fists on the table, the cuffs rattling loudly. She made me crazy. You don't understand. Lopez cut him off sharply. What I understand is that Samantha Hayes was a faithful wife. What I understand is that you strangled her in your bedroom while her wedding dress hung in the closet. And what I understand, Jason, is that all your excuses won't bring her back. Jason's shoulders sagged. He leaned back in the chair, his chest rising and falling as though the weight of her words pressed against his ribs. His lips trembled, and for the first time, the fight in him seemed to drain away. Meanwhile, across town, Samantha's friends gathered at the flower shop, lighting candles on the sidewalk. Her boss sobbed into a handkerchief, telling reporters, she was supposed to open this morning. She never missed a shift. She deserved so much better. The community, once buzzing with wedding joy, was now united in grief and outrage. News crews lined the street outside the Miller house, broadcasting live shots of the police tape fluttering in the wind. Anchors spoke of betrayal, madness, and a young life cut short. Back at the precinct, Lopez stepped out of the interrogation room and closed the door, exhaling deeply. She knew where this case was headed. The medical truth had destroyed Jason's defense. His story wasn't just weak, it was impossible. In the conference room, the prosecutor assigned to the case, Alan Peters, reviewed the medical findings. So, bottom line, he said, adjusting his glasses, he wasn't infected by her. The maggots were a result of his own poor hygiene. There's no evidence against the victim. None, Lopez confirmed. Every piece of evidence points back to him, her injuries, the timeline, his own statements. He created a story to justify his violence. But it collapses under the weight of the facts. Peters nodded grimly. Then we move forward with murder charges. No plea deals. This one's going to trial. And so the stage was set. Jason Miller, the man who had once danced proudly with his bride under string lights, would stand in court not as a husband, but as a killer. That night, as Jason sat alone in his holding cell, the truth gnawed at him like the very maggots he had feared. The image of Samantha's face, tear-streaked, pleading, full of love even in her last breath, flashed in his mind. He pressed his palms against his ears, trying to block it out, but there was no escape. The medical truth was undeniable, and it would follow him into the courtroom, into the judgment of the community, and into the rest of his life behind bars. The courthouse in Denton, Texas, stood like a monument to justice. Brick walls sunburned by decades of summers, white columns casting long morning shadows across the courthouse lawn. On the day Jason Miller's trial began, the steps were crowded with reporters, neighbors, and grieving friends of Samantha Hayes. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, a mix of sorrow and anticipation. The gallery was filled with townspeople, some clutching tissues, others crossing their arms tightly. Everyone wanted to see the man who had turned his wedding vows into a death sentence. Jason shuffled in wearing a wrinkled orange jumpsuit, chains clinking around his wrists and ankles. His once proud shoulders sagged, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. Gone was the groom who had raised a glass of champagne to his bride. In his place stood a man hollowed out by rage, guilt, and denial. Judge Rebecca Holloway presided, a stern woman with silver hair pinned back neatly, her black robe hanging heavy on her shoulders. She glanced at Jason only once before turning her focus to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said firmly, "you are here to determine whether the defendant, Jason Miller, is guilty of the charge of murder in the first degree. You will hear evidence, testimony, and argument. But above all, you must search for the truth." The prosecutor, Alan Peters, rose first. He walked to the jury box with calm precision, holding nothing but a yellow legal pad. "This case," he began, his voice low but steady, "is about trust." A young woman, Samantha Hayes, stood before her family and community, promising her love and devotion. She entered her marriage with hope in her heart. Days later, she was dead, strangled in her own bedroom by the man who vowed to protect her. The defendant wants you to believe she caused her own death by betraying him. But the evidence will prove that his story is nothing more than paranoia and lies. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. You'll hear from medical experts who will explain that Jason Miller's condition was caused not by infidelity, but by his own neglect. You'll hear from friends who will tell you Samantha was faithful, kind, and devoted. And you'll see the photographs, images of bruises on her neck, proof of a husband's rage. At the end of this trial, there will be no doubt. Jason Miller murdered his wife. The defense attorney, Mark Callahan, stood next. He was younger, with a sharp suit and an even sharper tone. This was not murder, he insisted. This was a man suffering from a sudden break in reality, a delusion brought on by fear and panic. Jason Miller loved his wife. He did not plan this. He did not premeditate. He lost control in a moment of confusion and terror. That is not first-degree murder. That is a tragedy, yes, but not the crime the state claims. Jason kept his head down as the jury studied him. Some shook their heads. Others remained stoic, waiting to hear the evidence. The first witness was Dr. Charles Avery, the medical examiner. He explained the autopsy findings with clinical precision. The cause of death was manual strangulation, he testified, his voice calm. The bruising patterns were consistent with hands gripping her neck. There were no defensive wounds beyond minor scratches, suggesting the victim was overpowered quickly. And what about the defendant's claims of infection? Peters asked. Dr. Avery adjusted his glasses. We found no evidence of any disease. The maggots Mr. Miller described were the result of a superficial wound on his own body that had become contaminated. This had nothing to do with his wife. The courtroom murmured, whispers rippling through the gallery. Jason shifted in his seat, his face tightening. Next came Samantha's best friend, Emily Ward. She sat in the witness box, her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. Samantha loved Jason, she said softly, her voice breaking. She was so happy when they got married. She never said a word about anyone else. She believed in him, even when some of us worried about his temper. She trusted him. Her words brought tears to the eyes of jurors, and even Judge Holloway's stern expression softened for a moment. The defense tried to paint Jason as a man who snapped under psychological strain. They brought in a psychiatrist who testified that Jason had a history of jealousy and paranoia, traits that could have fueled a mental breakdown. But Peters countered in closing arguments. Jealousy is not an excuse. Paranoia is not an excuse. Many people struggle with fear and suspicion, but they don't strangle their wives. Jason Miller made a choice, and that choice ended Samantha's life. The trial lasted 2 weeks, but the verdict came swiftly. After only 3 hours of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. Jason stood, chains rattling, as the foreman read the decision. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Miller, guilty of murder in the first degree. The gallery erupted, some in quiet sobs, others in sighs of relief. Samantha's parents clutched each other tightly, tears running freely down their cheeks. Her friends held hands, whispering her name. Jason's face crumbled as the words echoed through the chamber. He shook his head slowly, whispering under his breath, "It wasn't supposed to end like this." Judge Holloway banged her gavel, restoring order. Then she looked directly at Jason, her voice sharp with finality. "Mr. Miller, you took a sacred vow before your family, your community, and your God. Instead of honoring that vow, you shattered it with violence. For the crime of first-degree murder, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The chains on his wrists rattled again as deputies led him away. He glanced back once toward the gallery, but no one met his eyes. The trial was over. Justice had spoken. But for the people of Denton, the echo of Samantha's absence would linger far longer than the sound of the gavel. The gavel's echo still lingered in the Denton courthouse long after Judge Holloway's voice had fallen silent. Life in prison without parole. The words wrapped around Jason Miller like chains heavier than the ones clinking at his wrists. Deputies led him away, his head bowed, his lips moving soundlessly as though he were speaking to someone no longer there. In the gallery, Samantha's parents clung to each other, tears streaming down their faces. Her mother whispered her daughter's name over and over, as if repeating it might keep her memory alive. Friends of Samantha pressed tissues to their eyes, shoulders shaking with grief and relief all at once. Justice had been served, but the cost of that justice was unbearable. Outside, the courthouse steps became a stage for raw emotion. Reporters thrust microphones toward anyone willing to speak. Samantha's best friend, Emily Ward, wiped her eyes and told the cameras she was the kindest soul. She deserved a long, happy life, not this. At least now, she has justice. The story spread across Texas, then the nation. Headlines blared. Newlywed murder. Texas man sentenced to life for killing wife days after wedding. News anchors shook their heads at the senselessness of it all. Talk shows debated whether jealousy or mental instability had driven Jason. But in Denton, the community didn't debate. They mourned. At the flower shop where Samantha had worked, her co-workers built a memorial out front. Bouquets wrapped in cellophane leaned against the brick wall. Candles flickered beside a framed photo of her in her wedding dress, smiling with a radiance that now seemed cruelly prophetic. Customers left notes scribbled on card stock. "We miss you. Rest in peace, Sunshine Girl." Jason, meanwhile, entered the cold, unforgiving world of the Texas prison system. His first night in a cell was the longest of his life. The concrete floor felt harder than stone, the thin mattress barely cushioning his weight. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing the distant clang of doors and the muffled shouts of other inmates. But louder than all of it were the memories. Samantha's face, her tears, her final words, "I love you, Jason. Even now, I love you." They replayed in his mind like a record that could never stop spinning. He pressed his palms against his ears, but her voice always slipped through. In prison, Jason tried to tell his story. To the guards, to the other inmates, to anyone who would listen. "She betrayed me," he muttered. "She made me do it." But no one believed him. No one wanted to hear excuses. In their eyes, he wasn't a wronged husband. He was a coward who killed a woman who trusted him. Over time, even Jason's conviction in his own lies began to crumble. The medical reports were undeniable. The testimony of friends, the photographs, the bruises, all of it pointed to one truth. Samantha hadn't betrayed him. He had betrayed her. Back in Denton, life moved forward in small, painful steps. Samantha's parents started a foundation in her name, dedicated to raising awareness about domestic violence and the dangers of unchecked jealousy. They stood in church halls and community centers, telling her story, hoping it might save another young bride from the same fate. At her gravesite, fresh flowers were always present, some from her family, some from strangers who had read about her case and felt compelled to pay respect. Her headstone read simply, Samantha Hayes Miller, 1996 to 2023. Forever loved, forever missed. On quiet evenings, Emily often visited, sitting cross-legged by the grave and talking to her friend as though she were still alive. She told her about the shop, about the new puppy she'd adopted, about the weather, ordinary things. And every time, she whispered, I wish you were here. You should still be here. For the community, the trial and sentence brought closure, but not healing. Healing would take years, maybe lifetimes. People who had danced at Jason and Samantha's wedding found themselves haunted by the memory. They replayed the vows in their minds, till death do us part, and shuddered at how quickly those words had come true. Inside his prison cell, Jason grew older. His once strong body softened, his hair grayed, his face hardened with lines of regret. Inmates came and went, guards rotated, the world outside changed. But for Jason, time was frozen on that September night when he had lost everything. Sometimes, he still tried to convince himself he had been wronged. But other times, late at night, he whispered her name into the darkness. He admitted the truth only to the walls. I killed her, and I'll never forgive myself. In the end, Jason's sentence was more than bars and concrete. It was a lifetime of living with the memory of the woman who had loved him even as he took her last breath. And for Samantha, though her life was stolen, her story lived on, as a warning, as a tragedy, and as a call for justice. The town of Denton never forgot her. They spoke her name at candlelight vigils, told her story in classrooms, and etched her memory into the fabric of the community. The fairy tale had ended in violence, but the legacy was one of remembrance. In the final image, the white lilies Samantha once arranged in her shop bloomed again, planted by her family at her grave. Their petals opened wide under the Texas sun, fragile but resilient, just like the memory of the woman they honored. Justice had come, but peace? Peace was something Denton and Jason might never fully find.